Joanne Skousen is the co-producer of Freedom Fest and the founding director of the Anthem Libertarian Film Festival. She also serves as the entertainment editor and chief reviewer of Liberty Magazine, libertyunbound.com, and teaches English literature and composition at Chapman University and Sing Sing Correctional Facility, where she encountered some of the finest students of her teaching career. She is featured in the HBO documentary 0% about Sing Sing's college program, 0%film.com. Joanne has a master's degree in English literature from University of Florida and has taught English at Rollins College in Florida, Mercy College in New York, and Chapman University in California. Joanne is also the author of Matriarchs of the Messiah, Valiant Women in the Lineage of Jesus Christ, which offers a bold new perspective on women in the Bible as intelligent, courageous problem solvers who use their agency to make wise and often clever choices. Joanne does a great job of addressing the current civil rights movement and her thoughts on Black Lives Movement. Joanne is a huge advocate for making a positive difference, but what is so amazing is that her well-meaning intentions can be misperceived as racist. Things have become crazy. Joanne is an advocate for making a better world, and in her scholarly manner, she addresses what is happening with today's civil rights movement and many of the dangers in this current movement. Joanne discusses similar historic civil rights movements and then points out the limitations of the BLM movement, that the BLM movement is political, and while she agrees with the BLM as she describes it in small letters, she takes the stand that the BLM in capital letters is an organization that every American must be concerned about. There are old customs that are under siege as we are in lockdown. We are missing out on many events that are key to maintaining our culture. Habits are being replaced with overeating, drinking too much, which is leading to depression. Freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are no longer American rights. Even hateful speech must be allowed in this environment, and now many forms of speech are now being attacked as hate speech. She points out that in the same way as someone can write an opinion that involves hate, we have the right to disagree and express our own opinion as to why we do not agree. But we cannot take away the right of free speech. The mask is a sign of executive power going too far. We are losing our personal liberties, which is what America is founded upon. The laws are changing daily, and she describes it as a psychological torture. It is causing confusion and depression. Lockdowns are meant to force people into compliance. It is time to reclaim our freedom. Joanne does an incredible job on outlining that Americans must realize we are losing our freedom and that power-hungry governors are repressing citizen freedoms. This meeting was a strong voice that we must not comply, and liberty and freedom must be protected and fought for by all Americans. Persuade Americans and don't force us was her message. After Joanne speaks, Mike Lathigee asks, how is it that a person like Joanne, who deeply cares for humanity and is on the front lines helping people, can be called a racist? Then Mike discusses the insincerity of corporate and high-profile individuals who support Black Lives Matter due to compliance to pressure rather than what they really believe. Mike does express one positive aspect of the BLM movement, which is much-needed change to the judicial system. Those charged with federal crimes are bullied into taking a plea bargain deal, even if they are innocent. Judges will rule routinely in favor of their employer, the government, as they do not want to rock the boat. Overzealous prosecutors have been known to withhold information that can vindicate a defendant. Mike uses Lori Loughlin as a great example of the government's bully tactics.
What I'd like to do right now is, behind a great man or behind a great woman is a great man. Behind a great man is a great woman. That's what you have in the Skousen clan right there. Joanne is a class act, highly intelligent. It's funny when Freedom Fest puts out its articles and there's a viewpoint written. I don't read them all because I get inundated with information, but Joanne, whenever you write anything, I read it. Yeah, I really enjoy your articles. They're thought-provoking and they're unique. And so, Joanne is the co-producer of Freedom Fest, which is the largest libertarian event in the world. And she's the entertainer editor of Liberal Magazine, She has her master's degree in English, and each year it's so amazing when you go to Freedom Fest because there's a lineup of films that, like, the problem I have is I sit at home and when I go through normal television, Hollywood television, trying to find a film, I'm like, this is primarily crap. I would never watch this. But then if you go to Freedom Fest and you see the films that, all these private films that are being put together, that Joanne, she has a big event, it's like 100 times more classy than the Academy Awards. That's the way I look at it. And you get really thought-provoking movies that are made by people that have a statement to make to change the world in a good way, a great way. And that's why she's so valuable to our planet and what we're all about. And I'm real excited because this is the first time that we have both Mark and Joanne speaking in the same evening. And Joanne can't wait to hear what you have to say. Let's put it together for Joanne.
It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, and so many of our wonderful Freedom Fest people are here. We were so devastated when we had to cancel, as I know all of you were too. And you know, Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free. And I'm just really nervous about what I've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 years. Every year we choose a theme for Freedom Fest. And I've been saying, and being shot down for 3 years, I've been saying, we need our theme to be, are we headed for a new cultural revolution? Because I've been seeing so many parallels between what's happening in the United States and what happened in the 1960s in China. In fact, I'm seeing parallels in 2 ways. As I teach an intro to poetry class as an artistic inquiry class at Chapman University, and I teach Bob Dylan. I do a unit on Bob Dylan because he's a Nobel laureate, and also because he's just a wonderful poet. Not such a great voice. I never liked his voice, although it has really grown on me over the years. But when my students talk about the ills that they see in the 21st century, they're concerned about racism and civil rights and war and so forth. And I introduce them to Bob Dylan, and I say, these are the things you didn't invent this. We've been talking about this since the 60s. And of course, Bob Dylan wrote the lonesome death of Hattie Carroll, about a black woman who was, she didn't serve a drink fast enough in a country club, and she was beaten and killed. The death of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy who was tortured and beaten for talking to a white woman who later recanted and said he never came on to me, but by that time it was too late. He was the reason that Hurricane Carter got out of prison, because he took up Hurricane Carter's cause and wrote the song Hurricane. He wrote about these times, the times they're changing, and he said, one of the verses says, so if you're not with us, if your road is so old, get out of the way, because the times are changing. If you're not with us, then you just got to get out of the way and let us move ahead. And so my students are always really shocked and surprised to see the lyrics of the 1960s. I see other parallels right now with 1968. 1968, we had a huge pandemic. Does anyone remember that? I was a teenager at the time. Woodstock happened at the time. Lots of physical distancing going on there. We didn't close anything down. I don't even remember it. And yet many, many, many more people died in 1968 from the flu than have so far this year, and probably will. We also had terrible political unrest. We had the march with Martin Luther King and his assassination. We had 3 assassinations in the 60s, major assassinations. We had a terrible war that was going on. And for all anyone can remember about Richard Nixon is his resignation, but he ended the Vietnam War. He deserves a place in heaven just for ending the Vietnam War. How many of you served in Vietnam? A few of you did. And did you sign up or were you drafted? Drafted? Signed up. When I was in high school, I know you can't believe I was in high school then, but I was. And you never knew when you went to school who was going to be crying because her brother had been killed in Vietnam. My brother was there and he came back. We used to say he came back safe and sound. He came back safe, but he did not come back sound. He suffered forever, and so many of my friends I went to high school with couldn't go to college because they had to go into the war. And it wasn't their choice, and they came back vilified. And I salute those of you who served in the war, and I was so grateful when that war ended. So I see a lot of parallels going on, and I thought of this quote from Ronald Reagan last month when Hong Kong was completely shut down. When they came out with their national, let me think what it's called. It's called the National Law for Safeguarding National Security. And it virtually shut down all free speech in Hong Kong. The protesters had to stop. In fact, they immediately closed all of their social media and they contacted their friends in the West and said, if you've published any of my articles, please take them down because their lives were in danger. 360 dissidents, protesters were arrested the first week, sent to China where at best you get life in prison, at worst you're killed. And I'm not sure really which is the best and which is the worst to be spending your life. And here's the crux. Article 38 of this law says that this law applies to non-permanent residents of Hong Kong as well. In other words, it applies to the entire planet. I could be arrested and carted off to China for what I've just said because I'm speaking out against the Chinese government. It applies to everyone. So there's a reason to be chilled by what is happening in Hong Kong, and I am very concerned about it. I want to read you just quickly something that a friend of mine wrote, comparing what's going on there and just reminding us of what happened in 1966. He says, the day the police were no longer needed. This was a part of it. They eliminated the police, and the Red Guard came in and took their place. On August 19th, 1966, Chinese students launched a fight for social justice to fight for the rights of the oppressed in China. They were fighting for the oppressed. Sound familiar? They had a good cause. It was widely believed that the patriarchal system in China had been created by the 1% and held down women, minorities, and the working class. Sound familiar? These were the victims. The students cried out for a revolution and change and consequentially launched the infamous Chinese Cultural Revolution. Students put a red band around their arm to stand in solidarity with the oppressed and called for a change on the old ideas that they called the Four Olds. Now the Four Olds were old culture, old customs, old habits, and old ideas. All of those things had to be destroyed. And they went about it by demonstrating. It was supported by the Chinese media. Mass demonstrations and looting by the students ensued. Does that sound familiar? Mass demonstrations and looting. Statues were torn down. Chinese architecture was destroyed. Classical literature and Chinese paintings were torn apart and burned. They even went so far as to pluck up all the grass and to pull down the leaves of trees that were ornamental, because they were decorative, they were bourgeoisie, they didn't produce anything, they weren't of any value. So they were assigned to actually pluck up the grass and pull down the leaves. The cemetery of Confucius was attacked. The corpse of the 76th generation dude Yansheng was removed from its grave and hung from a tree. Wealthy homes were attacked and destroyed. Many families' long-kept genealogy books were burned to ashes. All of history, in short, was to be removed and replaced. All of history was to be removed and replaced. We talk about 1984. I know a lot of you have been thinking about the connections with 1984, and if you haven't read that book in its totality, you should. The three great books, the trilogy that prophesied what's happening now were Brave New World, 1984, and Fahrenheit 451. There's only one with even the glimmer of a hope, and that's Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. The others are so depressing, and yet that's what we're seeing now with the newspeak, with changing the way we see history, changing the words and the definitions that we use. So all of history was removed and replaced. This was the central meaning of cultural revolution, that China was going to destroy every trace of its bourgeois, privileged past and replace it with a new culture built on the principles of Maoism and Marxism. Communist leaders were taken out of power and replaced with men Mao believed were not critical to his reign. Public leaders who were considered to be oppressive were tried by angry mobs and vigilantes. 3 days later, August 22nd, 1966, a central directive was issued to stop police intervention. No more police. The police were disbanded in the city, and the students formed a community solution called the Red Guard. The Red Guard policed the communities and punished anyone who did not agree with their ideas. Even people that supported the movement but had bad thoughts, wrong think, hate crimes, could be punished. Though many Christians supported the movement in the beginning, they quickly became the number and target of the Red Guards, and public trials were held to condemn them to death. That's a part of it that I just think, wake up and see what's happening as you support these groups. And I think it's important, Mike, you mentioned Black Lives Matter. It's very important to understand there's a difference between lowercase Black Lives Matter and uppercase Black Lives Matter. Lowercase, of course, all people matter, and minorities have had a hard time in this life, and lowercase is very different from uppercase, which is an organization. It's a communist terrorist organization, and I'm just so disheartened when I see friends of mine unwittingly donating to Black Lives Matter, the organization, thinking that they're helping people who have been victims of racism when they're actually helping a communist organization. And they will turn on us, just like they turned on the Christians who supported the anti-patriarchy, thinking that they were helping women and oppressed people. So I am very concerned about these. What are some of our old customs that might be under siege right now as we're locked down? Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, Memorial Day, 4th of July, family in particular. Old customs, we're not doing those anymore. Birthday parties for our kids, no longer. Christmas, Thanksgiving, all of those holidays we look forward to. What are some of the old culture that we're losing right now? Concerts, plays, sports. All of our entertainers, all of our athletes are out of work for who knows how long, and nobody's being trained. Youth choirs are very important because the vocal cords and the ability to read music and to hit pitch is trained not only by the conductor, but by the children themselves as they train each other to sing. That's not happening, and it probably won't happen again for a couple of years at least. So old culture, our arts, our music, our dance, our entertainment is being destroyed. What about some of the old habits? What are some of our old habits that we aren't able to do now? What are some habits that you're not indulging in?
Going to the beach.
Yeah, going to the beach. Mm-hmm.
Visiting with friends.
Getting my beard cut.
Getting your beard cut, getting our manicures, going to the beach, visiting friends, playing cards, talking, going for a walk with a friend. All of our old habits are being changed, and they're being replaced with some habits that aren't so good. Habits like overeating, overdrinking, drug overdoses that lead to mental illness. And then old ideas, of course. What are some of the old ideas that we're losing? Old ideas like the Bill of Rights, old ideas like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Those are the I call them the twin towers of liberty, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, because everything else stands on those two pillars. Freedom of speech, the ability to talk to someone and persuade them to agree with you or not to agree with you, but the right to speak out,
Think about all of the important changes that have happened in our nation in the last century that could not have happened if hate speech had controlled free speech. Abolitionists were hated. They were fighting against the law, particularly the fugitive slave law. Without the ability to speak freely, slavery would never have ended. The same with women's suffrage. You had to be able to speak out against the patriarchy and accept being vilified and mocked in order to get the right for women to vote. Gay rights, gay marriage, again, going against the law and speaking out in order to persuade and to change. We have to have the right to speak freely. And that's why, while I don't agree with hatefulness, I have to disagree with the idea of hate crimes being a crime. Hateful speech has to be protected in the same way that any other speech is protected, because anything you say can be interpreted as being hateful by someone and can be silenced. Think of Branch Rickey. Who knows who Branch Rickey was? Okay, who was Branch Rickey?
Dr. Zummer.
Yep, and what did he do?
He hired Jackie Robinson.
Yeah, first man to hire a black man to play on a white baseball team. And how was he accepted?
I think there was criticized a lot.
Criticized a lot, and he actually had to break the law in a lot of places because it was actually against the law to be on the same field in some smaller municipalities. But he recognized freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Freedom of religion is an outcropping of those two. You're free to assemble in a church. You're free to speak freely, to worship. So even freedom of religion stands on those two pillars. So I'm very concerned about how acquiescent so many people are to the mask. Not because I don't think they're effective. They can be very effective when people are sick. I think that's why doctors and dentists use them. And I think people who are more susceptible need to wear them to protect themselves. But the idea that we need to all go along, it's just a mask. Why can't you just wear a mask? It's more than a mask. It is a symbol of silence, and it's a symbol of obedience, and a symbol of executive power gone amok. I watch, because of my film festival, I've been discovered by the Iranian filmmakers, and I get a lot of Iranian films from freedom fighters in Iran who make wonderful films, and they want to get their message out. So many times the message is about women and how they are oppressed, and they can't ride a bicycle, they can't drive a car, they have to wear the burqa, they can't go, and so I see a lot of films with women who are masked, and here we are masking ourselves, and I just get a chill when I see women wearing masks who aren't doing so because of health reasons, but because they've been mandated to do so. It bothers me a lot. I have a quote from Ron Paul that I want to share with you about that. It's actually, to me, it is what we're seeing with these changing rules. We're on, we're off, we're open, we're closed. As Mike said, it took them a lot of effort to change their gyms to get ready to open again, and you were open for 23 days, and now you're closed down, and now everyone's back to out of work, and now you're going to have to probably acquiesce to other things. Here's what Dr. Paul is the capriciousness of these laws. On again, off again, you can do this, you can't do that. You can have 50 people, you can have 250 people. You can have 50%, no, you can't have any, no more than 10. The changing of the laws is a form of psychological torture. There have been experiments done in prisons on what happens when you change laws capriciously. And I know because I've taught at Sing Sing for 12 years. I teach in a maximum security prison. And yes, 95% of them have tested positive and they're not dying. Oh wait, that was Joel who was saying that. 95% of them have tested positive and they're not dying. They're scared because they read all the papers and they're scared, but they're not dying. And neither are the homeless. So that's a little bizarre. If it's as dangerous as they say, why aren't the homeless dying? But it's a form of psychological torture. It creates mental confusion, which creates depression. And when you become confused and depressed, what do? You look for a leader to tell you what to do. And that's really the goal, is for us to find a leader to tell us what to do. And my phone keeps Okay, so here's what Senator Paul said. From former Senator and Dr. Ron Paul, Americans should pause and reflect on the lies they are being sold. Masks are just a form of psychological manipulation. And again, there are people who need to wear them because they're sick. That's fine, but it's the force that I'm concerned about. Many reputable physicians and scientists have said that they are worthless and potentially harmful. Lockdowns, listen to this, lockdowns are meant to condition people to obey without question. A nation of people who just do what they are told by the experts without question is a nation ripe for a descent into total tyranny. This is no empty warning. It's backed up by history. Time to stand up to all the petty tyrants from our hometowns to Washington, D.C. It is time to reclaim our freedom. We are just giving it away, and it just makes me so sad. Well, as I tell my students, back in the 60s, we marched for freedom, we marched for equality, we marched for better policies designed to make things better that somehow only made things worse. I see that over and over again. We have policies designed to make things better, and they only make things worse. Because the only thing that truly makes things better is the free market that sees a problem and figures out a solution. Government can't create, it can only mandate. And as Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And I thought of it again, I thought of Reagan's quote again this past week, 2 weeks ago, as we were forced to close Freedom Fest. And I thought how important the messages are. Speakers like Mike and Joel and Mark and myself and 200 other speakers and 30 wonderful films and 300 sessions all about freedom and how to maintain it and how to nurture it. As Milton Friedman said, he said, freedom is a rare and delicate flower, and we must nurture it. He said, freedom is a rare and delicate flower. Our minds tell us, and history confirms, that the great threat to freedom is the concentration of power. Our governors have become power hungry. They have run amok. They feel that they can just mandate whatever they want. And they're extending their executive orders way beyond the 30 days that they're allowed to do, and everybody's just acquiescing to it. It just makes me sick. Freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are our two most significant rights. Without them, we must cower in fear, afraid to speak, afraid to act, afraid to be canceled, afraid to be jailed, afraid to lose our jobs, afraid to lose our friends. And as the courageous freedom fighters in Hong Kong have sadly discovered, without these two freedoms, nothing can change. Without them, no one can rise up. No one can speak out against social injustice. No one can lobby for property rights or school choice or marriage rights without the freedom to assemble and the freedom to speak. And that's what's being destroyed by these lockdowns. We can't associate and we can't speak except very publicly on our social media platforms. So at Freedom Fest, we stand with Hong Kong. We stand with Venezuela. We stand with minority citizens who've been held back from the American dream. We stand with all those who want their voices to be heard. We stand with investors and business owners whose livelihoods are being destroyed by what is happening. We stand with the entertainers, the athletes, and who have worked their whole lives to get to the point where they should be competing at the Olympics right now. Right now. Will their bodies be able to do that again in 2 years, 4 years, or will this time just be lost for them? We stand with travelers and grandparents and students whose lives are being forever changed by the loneliness and isolation from each other. We have become a nation driven by cancel culture, public shaming, doxing, and virtue signaling. So-called hate crimes, while well-intentioned, limit free speech and may well lead to an environment where a future abolitionist or a future suffragette or a future gay rights activist would be arrested for expressing views different from the status quo. Remember, every one of those groups was speaking out against government laws. And in Hong Kong, they would be carted away and put into a Chinese prison for the rest of their lives. And so they've stopped protesting. They've stopped speaking out. We'll not hear their voices again. We can't risk having our free speech limited, even if it means allowing people to say hateful things. We must go back to the concept of persuasion versus force. Persuade me to wear a mask. Convince me to wear it the way I was convinced to wear a seatbelt. Many, many years ago, I never wore a seatbelt. Never wore a seatbelt until I had to take my daughter to a doctor. Happened to be a plastic surgeon because she'd been bitten by a dog. And in that waiting room was a woman whose head was completely swathed with bandages because she had gone through a windshield. That persuaded me. I have worn a seatbelt for the rest of my life. I am so uncomfortable if I don't have a seatbelt on. Persuade me, don't force me. When I was a little girl and my feelings were hurt, my mother used to say, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Well, the words did hurt, but they didn't break me. And that was the point she was trying to make. Learn how to persuade, learn how to debate, learn how to use evidence rather than, that's my opinion, which I hate hearing. And Voltaire is credited with saying it much more eloquently. He said, I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And I feel that the mobs are just shouting everyone down, and because they don't have true arguments. So, when we decided to invite Donald J. Trump Jr. to speak at Freedom Fest, we got a lot of flack over that. A lot of purist libertarians took to the social media airwaves and said, well, they never were libertarian. Look at who they're having done. No, they're never going back, yada, yada. Well, we're a big tent. We're a big tent. We invite people who are Democrat, we invite people who are Republican, we invite people who are libertarian, we have atheists, we have Christians, and I love this quote from Stephen Hopkins. It's quoted in the musical 1776. He said, in all my years, I ain't never heard, seen, nor smelled an issue that was so dangerous it couldn't be talked about. There's no such thing as hate crime. There's just a crime, and there are hateful people. But free speech should never be considered a crime. Freedom Fest has been shut down this year, and we grieve the loss of it. I especially grieve for my filmmakers because films have a shelf life. They have a shelf life, and I really grieve for them. We grieve the loss of being able to be with our friends, and we've loved being with our friends this last 2 days. It's been like a wake in a way, but also just a joyful experience to share with you. But Freedom Fest will not be silenced. We will continue to be the big tent, big enough for big ideas, controversial ideas, unpopular ideas, inspiring ideas, eye-opening ideas, ideas that will change our world. And I hope that you'll join us next year.
Wow. Phenomenal. Joanne always delivers such a great message. And you know what, Dom, please get a picture of the group as well. And part of the reason I want to do it, and I'm going to be very timely how I do it, not to ever expose, the hotel in particular, wouldn't do that, but it's about the independence, the expression of freedom of those who are here this evening, and the vast majority who elect personal individual rights of decision over what's mandated and forced upon us. And so, Dom, how that comes out is in the fact that some people are wearing masks, totally respect that. A large majority of people in this room have elected not to. And it's very interesting because we take that and we apply it out to the entire state of Nevada or the entire country of America and what percentage actually thinks. And so tonight we send a message, and I agree. One statement you said that really resonated was that the mobs are shouting down the purists. And very, very true. And I'm listening to people right now who are afraid to make statements. And being here tonight, conducting the way that we've conducted our meeting is sending a clear message. And we've got it on video. And for our guests this evening who end up becoming club members and so on, you'll certainly get a copy of all of our meetings, because that's what we do as an organization. One thing that you said as well, Joanne stands up here with a great message, a message of individual freedom and liberty. She comes at it from a place of an educated person who has studied. She works in a federal penitentiary. She cares about her fellow human being. But I'll tell you something. When she talks about Black Lives Matter in capital letters as a communist organization, the uneducated out there will attack her as being racist.
Yes.
And that's what's going on in America, and that's what's so wrong.
Yes.
And I won't stand up for it. And so this is the type of message we must communicate out there. And the things, I'm going to tell you just quickly a few things that are so frustrating to me. Things like Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner. The entire time he is one way on taking the knee on the national anthem. Now all of a sudden, through pressure, like everyone else, succumbing. And now allowing athletes to wear political statements on their back. I hear the corporations now are all succumbing. All they need is an email from BLM, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, I'm taking down all of the ads from Facebook, the right of free speech, and so on. Look, people have a right to free speech. If someone says something that is racist, you have a right to say something that isn't, and to say what was just said there is wrong. But one of our liberties in America is the right to speak and give our opinions, even if you don't agree with it. And, you know, the one thing, and I'm going to address Joanne, because the one thing I will say, and it's more about the small letter BLM than the big one, and because you work in the judicial system, one thing I hope that does change is this. Okay? And it's very, very important. We have 2.3 million, I believe, people incarcerated. That's 25% of the world populations of prisoners are in America, yet we only constitute about 4% of the world population. Here's the big problem. Here's the big problem. If you are charged with a federal crime in the United States, you have a 96% chance of taking a plea bargain. Why is that? It's because the feds win 98.6% of their cases. And what do they do? How does the system work here? And let me give you Lori Loughlin, perfect example of what happens. The prosecutor screwed up her case. I believe she would have won. Do I believe what she did was wrong? I do. But what did they do? They said, okay, you might win, but are you willing to go to trial? And if you lose, we are looking at putting you in prison for 40 years. All of a sudden, they offer her, you take 2 months in prison and you pay this fine, or you go to trial and we're going to try to put you away for 40 years. I don't care. I would say 99% of people will take the plea bargain even if they believe they're innocent. We have long documented evidence of overzealous prosecutors who withhold evidence, even with people on death row, that end up going to death because prosecutors withheld evidence. I don't care. To me, in a lot of ways, that's a barbaric state. So what is one thing about small letter BLM that I want to see change? I want to see change in our judicial system. That's what I want to see. I want to see a system where if you are charged with a federal crime, you have a right to defend yourself and not be bullied into an unlimited government budget that can attack you and make you bankrupt even if you win, but you've only got a 1.4% chance of winning if you go to federal trial. One more quick example, and Mark, you're not even aware of this, but this is a really sad example. Marcus Mumford is an American hero. Marcus Mumford won 3 federal cases in a row to defend with defendants that ended up winning. And what happened after he won 3 cases in a row? The federal government worked to have him disbarred in every state that he practiced. Marcus had no way of making a living. This is a great, great libertarian fighter for change in the system. Marcus had a lot of stress. He passed away a few months ago, and I think the government killed him. He had a heart attack. And I said to Mark, you had to speak at your event. But these are the things that go on.